So we're going to do, I think, a continuation of the last meeting, which was essentially filter tuning. So if you guys are cool with that, I think it's a good place to continue again. We talked about a lot of things last week. It was a good soon to be a video of pretty good interest. So that's kind of neat. So it's open-ended. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah, I have like the idea if you could like explain your approach on like finding the limits for the filtering, like how much should we push, or what is like the limit, what is safe to fly, what is no longer safe to fly, like based on like the logs, because sometimes we just stop when we hear the thrilling sound or so in the motors. But if there's like any let's say a value, like you usually set like minus 10 dB on the gain, right? But if there is like, let's say a golden rule, like what not to cross, what to look for. Okay, so
I would say what I discussed last week. The general rule of thumb would be to focus on D term. We discussed why, right? Because
yeah, right.
D term, the gyro alone is good, but the D term is going to actually represent closer to the reality of what's coming out and going into the ESCs.
Have you had like much discussion in any of you? I don't know if you've done this in the past. Maybe it's already been talked about. I know one time me and you did some quick little testing and understandings of the four different types of filters. And if we're talking about D term specifically, I remember it was really helpful when we did a little test with changing the filter settings, just the type of filters on the D term, and doing quick little tests to see, and talking about like how biquad reacts differently and does different things, and why you don't use a second PT or a second low pass on the D term whenever you move it from PT1 to biquad or any of the others. So I don't know if that's a good test to do.
So when you said four different types of filters, for me, I just generally see two types of filters.
Notch 1, 2, 3, and biquad.
No. So notch filters and low pass filters, but you're referring then to four different types of low pass filters.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, the D term low pass filtering, and like how to, if you're gonna change it, how not to change certain things. Because I remember. What I was doing was I was getting way too much D term filtering, and it was because I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong, and it was because I was moving those first low passes but not turning off the second one. And then me and you did some really quick hover tests and stuff, and you literally showed me like on the plots, like this is the differences. You know what I mean?
Okay, let's open up Betaflight and take a look at those. This is a good place to start. So when you go to the filter tab, what Troy is referring to is that when you look at the D term, for example, or even the gyro, there's a drop down for different types of low pass filters. So in both the gyro low pass filters and in the D term, that says filter type, and you'll see PT1, biquad, PT2, and PT3. Now, probably the best way to cluster these is in terms of, there's sort of two different types, really. There's the PT series, PT1, 2, and 3, and then there's the biquad. So let's start with the PT series. So you have a PT1, PT2, and a PT3. What these are essentially is what we would call a first order filter, PT1, versus a second order, PT2, versus PT3 is a third order. What do we mean by first, second, and third order? And actually, just to be clear about this, some developers, some engineers and experts in filter types might not call that first, second, or third order, but for the sake of simplicity, what we mean by first order is it's going to basically attenuate less. So imagine that this is the low pass filter. It lets the low frequencies pass, and then the cutoff is here, and then it starts to curve down, right? And what a first order will do is it'll attenuate at some level. A second order will go steeper and attenuate deeper, and a third order would go down even lower, right? I'll show you this in PID Toolbox in a few minutes using the filter simulator. So in the PID Toolbox Pro version, there's a filter simulator, and you can see what those three filter types do. So that's the main thing with those. So in other words, a PT1 is a very light filter. It's not a really strong amount of attenuation. But in Betaflight, what they do is they apply two PT1s to the D term. So they put them on top of one another. So in essence, two PT1s act similar to a single PT2. I say similar because there's going to be some differences in the shape of that curve, how steep it goes down, and how much it attenuates. But roughly speaking, two PT1s layered on top of one another is a little bit like a PT2, right? So that's what you're looking at here. By default, Betaflight has a single low pass, like D-term low pass 1 set with the single PT1, right? And then the D-term low pass 2 is also a PT1. They have different cutoffs, but essentially they're two filters on top of one another. So I think, Troy, what you're referring to is sometimes what I would do is I would probably remove the second one and then instead turn this to a PT2 or sometimes even a PT3, something like that. So we'll get into, I can show you what doing these types of things does to the shape of the curves. But
And there's probably a difference in latency, right, between these.
There is, but it's not exactly as you think. For example, if you set two PT1s like this, you don't really know for sure that turning this off and setting a PT2 is the same. It's probably going to be much less latency here.
Okay.
Right. But you don't get, and there's no free lunch. This is the phrase you often hear. There's no free lunch. In other words, the amount of attenuation per, however you set this up, it's going to cost you the same amount of delay, generally speaking. So what are the differences? Why would we bother to go with a PT2 over a PT1, etc.? That's probably a question you want to ask. Mm-hmm. And then there's, of course, the biquad, which is a little different again. So the biquad is a different type of low-pass filter. It has a different shaped impulse response. I'll show you that stuff. These are not really important things for everybody to know in general. You can really get into the weeds on this stuff. And some people that are really into like trying to tune out prop wash to the nth degree get really caught up in all this stuff. But in my opinion, it's not super important either way. Let me tell you one thing though, so when Troy asks, why do I sometimes go with a PT2 and then I'll turn this to a static and then I'll just play with that? The primary reason I do that, the primary reason is because it's simple. Conceptually, it's simple, and I like that. I'm a simple kind of guy. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, when you if you had that at a PT1 dynamic plus this, that's a complicated sort of set of parameters. And another thing about it is the reason I like simple is when I'm out in the field, I don't always use, or in the past, I didn't always use, for example, the sliders and stuff. I didn't want to plug into Betaflight all the time. So I would sometimes use the goggles and manipulate the D term in the field. Why would I do that? Because when I would go tune, I would do the typical, PTB method of tuning in here, in-house. I would get a certain result, but if I was really picky about my 5-inch and I really wanted to get top-notch prop wash performance, I would still, in the field, manipulate a couple of parameters. And I would do that in real time and get that, feedback from prop wash moves. It's easier to do quick changes, right? So what I would do is I'd go in the field and I would start doing 180s. And you'd get a prop wash and you come back and prop wash and just doing these sharp moves, turn around landing into your, turbulent air, and you get a little prop wash move, right? And then what I would do is I would make little adjustments, like what would happen if I raised the D term slider a bit, and I would finesse around those things. Because what I've come to find with a lot of drones is sometimes you'll get a better result if you lower the D term a little bit, D term low pass. Sometimes you'll get a better result by raising it a little bit. And doing that in the field can help a lot. And I would probably even play around a little bit with the D term. So even though I might have found, for example, that I get optimal damping at 0.95 or something like that, I might find that in the field when I play around a bit that maybe prop wash performance gets a little better if I tip that a little bit to the right or the left. Now, why is that? Why is there kind of like a Goldilocks sweet spot? I'm not absolutely sure, but I think in part it has to do with how much noise you have coming through the system. Because imagine this scenario. Imagine you have some electrical noise. Electrical noise is not going to be, for example, related to the motion of the copter, but it's going to be noise maybe just from the electronics. But the PID controller doesn't know that. So the P term, if it sees some kind of gyro signal that goes into some direction and comes down, if that was purely due to electrical, the P term is still going to act on it. And so by turning up the D term, what you'd be essentially doing is also turning up that noise. That might in and of itself not necessarily help prop wash, right? So in that case, sometimes maybe more filtering with a little less D term might serve you well. Now, if the rig is exceptionally clean, you might find that you could actually bump the D term up a little past where you would typically dampen, and what you'll find is you'll get really good prop wash performance because it's true, just drone related motion coming through the system. So those are the reasons why I would kind of mess around with these parameters. Now, as I mentioned, do you have any questions about that? And before I go into showing you, yeah.
Can I ask about dynamic and static? As I understand, like dynamic low pass PT2 will give more delay, right? Because it can go down and like to 75.
No, give more delay than what? It's always relative to something.
I mean, more than static. Static
Well, not necessarily,
57.
because Betaflight default, if you have dynamic here and you're at default, then it means at idle you'll have a cutoff of 75 hertz, and at full throttle you'll be at 150. If I turn off dynamic, I always have 75 hertz. So technically, you'd actually have more delay here at hover than you would here, because at hover here you're going to be closer to about 100 hertz.
And about electrical noise, where is located usually, like before 100 hertz?
Broad. It's always broad, and it's, I mean, normally it'd probably look like white noise, possibly, but where I see it manifest, it tends to be in the low frequencies. But that's in part, I would say, because we have low pass filtering in the hardware filter, right? We talked about that last week, how gyros have their own filter built in.
We were talking about electrical noise, and the reason why I asked you where it's usually located, because you told like we can have like peaks of electrical noise, and I thought maybe these peaks can be located under 100 hertz.
Yeah, no, typically it's not a peak. Typically it's like a broadband.
Broad.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing I'll quickly mention is, if you want to learn about the filters and what they do, is if you go into obviously you guys are all pro users, right? You're all pros.
Yes.
So when you go in here to filter sim, you can have a lot of fun with this. It's pretty overwhelming if you don't know, obviously starting off it's a bit overwhelming, but there's a lot you can learn about filters in here. So first of all, let's look at low pass filters. So you can see here that if you take a single, let's turn off one of these and just take a look at a single low pass, right? So you'll see that this low pass, it's a PT1 with a cutoff of 250 hertz. The first thing you'll notice is that it doesn't go and then straight down the line here, right? It's actually a gradation right from the get-go. So in other words, there's attenuation even below the cutoff. You see that? So anything below 1 means there's attenuation. At 1 means no attenuation. All right? So no matter what the cutoff, so when you think about Betaflight's cutoff of 500, even 500 hertz has attenuation below the cutoffs, all right? So 100, 200, there's a little bit. And the way that's shaped, that amount of attenuation differs depending on whether you're using a PT1. If you go PT2, you'll notice it's a little deeper here. and a little steeper, right? Go PT3, you can see that. If you look at a biquad, look at this. It's very different. So there's various types of biquads. So you'll notice here I'm showing a biquad Butterworth and a biquad Bessel. They're sort of variants of the biquad. The one that's implemented in Betaflight is the biquad Butterworth. So you click on that. Notice that's much less attenuation here and a bit steeper here. So there might be cases where that is of interest. But generally speaking, the PT series work better for the D term because they attenuate more below the cutoff for the same cost. So for example, if I put a PT2 on here and compare it to a biquad, to make these match, we'll just back this up and look at the filter delay here. This is the delay. So the PT2 at 250 hertz is yielding roughly 0.8 milliseconds, so just shy of a millisecond. And we can match them, but we got to bring this guy down a bit. So just keep nudging it back until that green number approximately matches the other number. Something like that, probably a little bit higher. But what I want you to pay attention to is here we have a PT2 and a biquad matched for filter delay, so same cost, but look at the way the PT2 attenuates below the cutoff, right? So in other words, both filters should yield approximately the same amount of filter delay, but the PT2 is going to give you better, cleaner signal here. Where the biquad wins is up here. Okay, so the biquad, the green, is going to give you more attenuation well above the cutoff. So what do you think is better, right? What do you want to do here? If you look at most, the output of most drones, you look at the spectral output of the D term, what you'll find is that there's much more energy in the low frequencies and it falls as a function of frequency. So in other words, I think the PT series works better than the biquad for really trying to address this, right? And that's really the problem area, 0 to 300 or 400 hertz. When you get above that, everything is always below about minus 20 on the D term. So that's
look at the way. Hey, Brian.
Yeah. Hey, Stephen.
Can you hear me? The filter delay rolls off faster as well, doesn't it?
The filter delay, yeah, that's a good point. So this is, now we're going to go high level.
That's true. Yeah.
Filter delay as measured by PTB and right is basically what's happening mostly below about 20 hertz or so, or 30 hertz. So you're absolutely right. The filter delay then goes up for the biquad here, and then it's falling on the PT series here. That's good. But at 100 hertz, is there really much of anything that's like prop wash or anything related to flight characteristics? So I would probably say not. But so really what you want to be looking at is this period here. But I mean, at this point, you're really in the noise, right?
Yeah.
The differences are very subtle.
About 70, maybe.
So you're only looking at differences of.
You've got the cutoff. You got the cutoff at 250.
Yeah, right. That's right. So if we could lower the cutoff. But any way you slice it here, I think that the D term favors the PT series, whether it be PT2 or PT1.
Brian, this delay in like 3 milliseconds, it's delay on like 20 hertz. This number shows us like delay 3 milliseconds from two low pass filters. These numbers, is it related to 20 hertz or like lower than 100?
You can see it. You can see it. So basically, take your little data tip, put it on the line.
It's not on cutoff section.
No. Put your data tip on the line and just drag it around.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Y value. The Y.
Okay, I see.
Okay?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Filter delay is not constant. That's what Stephen was trying to point out. I'm going to make the argument that for our purposes, we don't have to worry about anything with respect to filter delay above about 50 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even though filter delay is quite a bit higher up here. And even more important, really what's important is the shift in the phase delay. As I said, this tool can be really useful to try to understand filters, but it's a journey. If you've never looked at this stuff, spend the next 6 months thinking about it if you really want to dig into that. It's not simple to understand. And I could dip into it now, but I feel like as soon as I open my mouth and go down into the phase delay world, most of you are going to get glossy eyes. But you can, if you want to see how this is functioning, another thing you can do is plot a signal down here. This is really valuable. So if you go over here, you see that we have the plot. We can plot the step response. So this is the step response of the filter, the impulse response.
Upload service.
And there's a signal generator. If you want to try to understand how some of this is working, the best thing you could do in the beginning is plot a signal down here. So that's by using this drop down, the signal generator, and then set your cutoff and look down here at what it's doing. What you're looking at is the unfiltered signal in gray and the filtered signal in red. Now, the signal is essentially what's called a chirp signal. It starts at a low frequency and then slowly goes to higher and higher frequency. The only purpose in it is just to show you what is happening with that signal. Okay? And what you want to do is get your little zoom tool here and just zoom in on the really low frequencies. Okay? So this is the kind of frequency at which you'd probably move the sticks. Nobody in this, chat here can probably do this with that gray curve. You'd have to hit the stick so fast you'd probably snap it off. Anybody got a thumb like that? The acceleration of that gray line there is like a few microseconds or so. So where we're interested is in what's happening at these lower frequencies, okay? And so what you can think of here is that the gray line is the unfiltered signal and the red line is the filtered signal. You see how it shifted it in time? So that's essentially what it's doing to our gyro signal or our D-term signal. And the only reason it matters is the degree to which it shifts the P and the D out of phase with the reality that's happening in the drone, right? And if you start to shift the phase, when we say phase, what we mean is if you take a signal, the phase of the signal is where in this sine wave curve you're at, okay? Generally, we would start phase by saying we pick the point on the line at the 0 point, and we would call that 0, starting at 0 degrees. We're going to convert this to degrees, like a circle. You have 0, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and 360 degrees, okay? If you convert that to a sine wave signal, we would say that's 0 here, that's 90 degrees here, that's 180 degrees here, that's 270, and that's 360. So one full sine wave is 360 degrees. So when you look at phase delay, that's the way to interpret that. That's in degrees. So it's telling you how much the signal that you're interested in, so in this case it's the gyro signal, how much it's going to be shifted out of phase relative to the original unfiltered signal. And as we've discussed in other videos, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this to you. If you take P term and it's out of, you have some kind of oscillation like prop wash, and you want P term to be perfectly opposing the opposite the phase of the gyro's oscillation. And if you start shifting that, suppose it was 90 degrees out of phase, then it's going to start, instead of pushing against the drone to stop it from oscillating, it's going to start pushing into the same direction as the drone is oscillating. And that's when you start to get that positive feedback loop I was talking about. So you get poor prop wash performance, and at some point you'll generate a positive feedback loop that could even send your drone into a flyaway. So as you look at these filters and the filter delay and the phase, think about that, right? So that's what you're doing here. And you're looking, so you can really see that above 100 hertz, the phase gets really out of whack, right? But fortunately, it doesn't matter too much to us because our drones are not responding at that point, right? Our drones and the inputs that we're giving it, the inputs we're giving it are probably generally less than about 20 hertz. Prop wash is going to be probably less than roughly 50 hertz, depending on the power, weight, etc. of the drone. So, you know, for the most part, most of our world is happening less than 50 hertz. So, and when you look at the phase shifts there, you're only looking at a max of about 30 or 40 degrees out of phase in its worst case scenario, right?
Like, what frequency, like, we have prop wash, and what frequency we have, like, stick movement?
That's a broad question. Stephen, what frequency is prop wash?
It depends from size of the propeller.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think that it was higher frequency, but it's actually really just, yeah, I think you're right. I think there probably isn't any point in bothering higher than 50 hertz. But maybe on a really small quad, it might be faster. I don't know.
Right. So let's say, you know, 30 to 50 hertz for a 5-inch, 7-inch, it's going to go lower. 8-inch, up in the world that Troy works in, 8+ inch, it's even less than that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the world that we want to look at is the amount of phase delay that's happening at those low frequencies. So in essence, you know, you could kind of zoom in on this about here. There's the phase delay, you know. Yeah, this is a fun tool to work with. I'm not even going to tap into like notches because that world, everything just blows up and you'll be completely confused over here. But that's just in essence this tool, and you can think about that. I think it should be clear though, like that the biquad is probably not the optimal filter. It's being a little bit phased out to some degree, but the code that's involved in generating the biquad is the same code that generates the notches for the dynamic notches. It's the same code that generates the notches for the RPM filters. So that code's not going to disappear anytime soon. But the actual biquad low pass filter it's kind of fell out of fashion, let's say.
Can I just have Brian, can I just have a moment?
You can have 2 moments, my friend.
Well, do you remember I was saying, because you were quite big on the biquad for a long time,
Yeah,
and I kept saying,
I changed my mind. I reserve the right to change my mind.
I'm very happy. I'm delighted to hear it. I mean, I've become a big PT3 filter fan, and it took me a while to come around to it too. So, yeah, they're very useful, and who knows if we'll continue having the biquad filter and beta flight, but they're quite, it's kind of like, it's a part of the furniture now, so I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
So this is a good, let's compare a PT1 versus a PT3 and see which one serves you best. So if you had, let's say we set the PT1 so that we have, say, roughly, say 1.7 milliseconds or so. To make the PT3 match that, I'd have to go something like this, okay? And probably a little bit less here, but I can't get the number. Again, you know, all of this is assuming that filter delay is constant, but it's not, of course. But the differences, again, that are happening at the frequency range that we're interested in, it is fairly constant at that point. So this is approximately matching a PT1 and a PT3. So this is interesting, okay? So looking at this plot, let's leave this one alone for the moment and come up here. So here we have a PT1 and a PT3 relatively matched, but look at the PT1 and how much more it's attenuating below the cutoff. So just like we showed with the biquad, if you take a PT1 and you set the cutoff lower, you're going to get much better attenuation down here. Now the trade-off is you're going to get less attenuation up here. But depending on the nature of the noise that you have coming through the D term, you might be better off in some cases with something like that. Right? So that's a match. 90 hertz on a PT1, 138 on a PT3. What are your thoughts about that?
So we can choose, if we have more noise like in lower frequency, we can choose like PT.
I can guarantee you that almost always you will have more noise in the lower frequencies. That's just
So PT1 better, and for most cases.
Yeah. But like again, I haven't experimented with this. For the most part, I'm more often than not now just leave the dual PT1. Sometimes I put on a PT2 for the sake of simplicity. But it's kind of as broad as it is long. Like the differences there are pretty subtle, right? That's one thing you should be able to gather from this, that the differences, whether you use a PT1, a dual PT1 or PT2, it really depends on the cutoff and how you set it up, the amount of filter delay you're getting. But at the end of the day, you don't have to worry too much. Let's plug this in again. This is why I've also simplified it, because when clients or anybody new to the hobby opens up this tab, the first thing you do is they get extremely overwhelmed, okay? Because it looks so complicated, especially the low-pass filters. It's unnecessarily complicated for the amount of benefit you're getting from, say, a dynamic low-pass filter. Like the amount of benefit you get from a dynamic low-pass, it's never really been well established that it's really improving prop wash performance in any significant way. I haven't seen data on it. What's that?
Brian, do you think we should get rid of the dynamic low-pass filters?
I don't care either way, but if the interest was to make it simpler for the user, I think it's not a bad idea. Now, I like having the dual set of filters here. I think that's really wise, because there are scenarios where, if you break this out, I've seen scenarios where stuff just emerges like even post 500 hertz, and you're like, damn, if I just had another low pass out there somewhere, it might, and it wouldn't cost me much. So to have two low pass filters on each, on the gyro and D term, I think is good. The D term portion adds a level of complexity, because I think people get too caught up in this stuff, and there's a lot of numbers here. Right? The more numbers, the more it goes over a lot of people's heads. Yeah. But, Betaflight, at the heart of Betaflight, these two things are doing most of the work, I think. This and this. And, yeah. Those are all good questions,
I have one more. I remember you said about for filtered D term, we should be lower than -10. -10, it's also about like 50 hertz, right?
Yeah, because below about 50 hertz, you're going to see the energy rise really fast. That's your input, right?
So after,
and especially if you're looking at, let me be clear with this, if you're looking at, say, a racing log file where you have a really aggressive pilot on the roll axis, you're going to see energy right up into even 100 hertz go up. So don't forget that, like, it's not an all or none thing. It's not like everything below 20 hertz is you and everything above it is not you. It's a gradation. It's a continual gradation. There's much. So even if you move the sticks as hard as you can, you're going to get a lot of energy at 1 hertz. You're going to get, or 5 hertz or whatever. You'll get less at 10. You'll get less at 20, 30, 40. But there's still going to be some effect there.
Okay, so we set the D-term filtering to be around that -10 on hover. Then when we do the acro flight and so on, it sometimes also go over the 1 dB or over to the positive dB, right? Values. Is it like the rangers or?
When I say that sort of minus 10 dB, that is a coarse cutoff, guys. Don't like think about a shaded area there. It doesn't mean that you tip over 10 and all of a sudden the world's going to come to an end. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. People wanted a line. People ask me, where do I stop it? Right there's your line, minus 10. But I can't tell you. It's again, it's a gradation. Maybe zero is fine. It depends to some degree on your tolerance. Do you have a $50,000 camera on board? Well, maybe err on the safe side. Is it a little tiny whoop? Then who gives a? I was like, so the way you treat this has to depend on your level of tolerance and also, the level of safety, those kinds of things. But I can only give you a line that I think is a decent place to start thinking. If it's well above minus 10 dB on the D term, it might be of interest to you to pay attention to it.
Brian,
Yep.
like for me, some symptoms, I saw it's kind of shaking on high throttle when I just like make from 0 to 100 throttle, and around like 80% the camera, I mean, my view start to shake a little bit, and I can see. And does it related to the term and it should be lower, or we just don't have enough filtering?
Sometimes.
So
Sometimes. That's a complicated problem to solve.
I understand.
There. And there's
Sure.
many factors that can play into that. So yeah. But you want to take a systematic approach to trying to solve it, starting with the low-hanging fruit. By low-hanging fruit, I mean the things easy to pick, right? So
Yeah.
if you think that if you have that issue at top throttle and you're noticing that, and you have a hypothesis that it might have something to do with noise in the gyro or the D term, then exactly like you said, turn the slider down, try it again. That's low-hanging fruit. You didn't have to take the drone apart. You didn't have to, but you're going to find with that type of a problem that you're going to have to do many things. So it might come down to maybe the PIDs are too high. Again, low-hanging fruit. Maybe there's something wrong with the flight controller. Complicated. Maybe there's something wrong with the camera. Maybe the camera itself, the camera mount. So you have to go through a series of things, and you want to do it as systematic as you can, because it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I saw your video about like basement tuning, and probably I didn't understood it like correctly about how high we can put master multiplier. And usually when like last 6 months I was tuning in the way I was finding the end of master multiplier after when the speed of changing doesn't change anymore.
Yeah.
And I had some problems with like you cannot like tune filters when you have like really high master multiplier and you have a lot of noise below 100 hertz. And I thought if I will lower master multiplier, I mean the term and so on, I will have more prop wash because the speed of changing excess will be like slower. But I decided to slow it, like to make it lower, master multiplier, and kind of the prop wash became better because as I understood, the signal became more clear for drone to to stabilize. And now I'm doing even lower and kind of getting better results.
There you go. Higher is not always
It was
better.
like so.
No, you've answered your own
Eye-opening
question.
experience.
Yeah, you've answered you answered it exactly right. Like that's absolutely true. Yeah. So
Because
did everybody else understand what he just said?
Kind of.
a little bit. Yeah.
It was a little bit like what I was describing earlier. Like he might be in a scenario where maybe turning up the master multiplier was just amplifying noise that didn't have anything to do with actual movement. Again, like broadband or electrical noise. And in those cases, turning up the master or relaxing the filters may not actually facilitate prop wash handling. So I think there's always a trade-off between those two things. And in his case, he said lowering the master multiplier resulted in better performance. Is that correct? Am I saying correctly?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you have to keep an open mind, right? You're playing an interesting game there between. You're playing an interesting game between, on the one hand, filter delay. You want to reduce as much as possible, but the signal quality, right? The quality of the D term, is it really, is it just noise spiking up and down that's carrying meaningless information, or is it real movement information in there? And the more meaningless information that's in there, you could be just amplifying that noise and sending it to the ESCs and the motors.
Sort of like the noise that you see for the first, second, and third harmonics. If the gyro pre-filtered, the harmonics are pretty well defined. Let's say we have like peaks between, for the first harmonic, between 100 to 150. And then the second, it's like 250 to 300 and so on, right? What's the best way to like target those peaks? Is it a notch filter?
Oh, well, okay. So you must be new to Betaflight. I would say the single most important contribution to Betaflight would have to be the gyro RPM notch filters. You must have heard of RPM filters.
Yeah. I'm not new to Betaflight.
Okay,
use it
so then
quite a bit.
So RPM filters do exactly what you just said. They basically are notch filters that chase the motor frequencies.
Okay, so you're saying make modifications to the RPM filter, essentially.
You don't even have to modify it. I mean, by default for a 5-inch, it's going to work out of the box.
Right.
You don't have to do anything. Yeah. But there are some tweaks that you can do there to RPM filters to really reduce filter delay quite a bit. But generally speaking, they're already optimized really well for a 5-inch. I like to raise the filter Q for the RPM filters, but that's an advanced sort of CLI command.
Gotcha. Yeah. I watched a couple of your videos. I actually bumped it up to 1,000 and it like reduced my filter delay significantly. It was crazy.
Yeah, if you have a really clean rig, I think it's good to do that. Yeah.
Got it. And in terms of like optimizing, I guess, the noise for the harmonics, is that mostly the gyro RPM and the dynamic notch filter?
What do you mean by noise of the harmonics? They're just harmonics, or they're no harmonics? They're motor. They're literally. So what we're doing with RPM filters, when you think of RPM, it's rotations per minute, right?
Yep.
The frequency of the notch is simply the RPM divided by 60. It's RPS, revolutions per second.
Rotations per second. Yep.
Yeah. And so all it is, literally, if you see noise at 140 hertz, motor noise, it means that the motor propeller is spinning 140 times in 1 second.
Oh, that's helpful. Okay,
Right?
got it.
And so the second harmonic is going to be double that. So if it's 140, then the second's 280, and then you add another 140 to that, that's the third harmonic. So they're octaves.
Huh. Interesting. I did not know that.
It's interesting
that's great.
they aren't really harmonics in the sense of like musical harmonics. Some people call an octave a harmonic, but they're octaves. Yeah. Their pitch is double. Yeah. Whereas,
Understood.
Yeah. But sometimes I don't know if I've ever seen like where there's like a fifth or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe as you get
Or a sweet third.
More motors. That's awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Brian, about harmonics, if we see kind of like for first harmonic, we have like two separate lines, but it's first harmonic.
I didn't hear the question.
About like harmonics, I saw in my logs sometimes. I suppose it's because of maybe bad motors. We have like first harmonic, and we have like the same first but little bit lower. it's also first harmonic, like two
Not necessarily,
lines.
not necessarily. But you're speaking about the frequency by throttle plots, right?
Right, right.
Like, why don't you show me data? If you have PID Toolbox there?
Yeah, I have, and
Yeah.
in black box you can see it like kind of different. So here, I think this one you can see it's like one solid line, and then you have like shade here, one like shadow or like
That's not.
second.
Yeah, that's still part of the first.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of how I understand it. Like we have first harmonic, but we have like four motors, and one of them can be on little bit different frequency than like
I
like
think
another three.
I think you are talking about front and back motors. Is that possible? If you have an off center of gravity, then the
Yeah.
front or back motors work harder, higher RPM, and so they shift in frequency a little higher up. So you can see that if
Yeah.
you turn on the RPM filter lines in the spectral view,
Yeah.
and then when they shift, when you have two different bands, then your center of gravity is off.
That's right.
That's the problem. I think you're talking about that.
Okay, so
Okay.
let me just talk exactly what Axel was saying. We'll just come out of this and go into the frequency by time, and run that same file. Okay, that's a horrible plot, though. Can you pick a color scheme that we're all familiar with?
Just go into the, I think I just go one step back into the FFT plot and then turn on the RPM lines. So you see them differ, right? But this is only, in your case, it's just a tiny bit, right? So when this is from hover, for example, then they can be in one line more or less. And then when you start to fly, the back motors, for example, have to do more lifting, so they have to do more RPM, so they shift a bit up in frequency as opposed to the front motors, for example, because they have to do less work. When you are head heavy, it's the opposite way around. So the front motors have to work harder to keep the quad up, and then the frequency of those two motors shifts up. So this gives you a broader peak of noise in that representation of your frequencies. So, and if you
Here we can
if you
match.
turn and if you turn on like the second and the third harmonic, it becomes even more obvious.
That's right. Yeah. So you've got a general spread there, but it looks like your back motors are working harder than your front, and that's not surprising. When you're moving forward and you're pitched forward, the back motors are generally going to be working harder than the front motors, so they'll have slightly higher RPM. That's all that is. So your blue and your red are your back motors, right? So they're at a higher frequency. That's what Axel's saying. So if you were to plot the frequency by throttle and you had very distinctive back motors higher than the front, or either way, right? Then it's a COG issue, and it's going to result in two different sort of motor bands in the frequency by throttle. That throws a lot of people off sometimes, but you really got to, right from the get-go, you got to look and make sure and see how much of a COG issue you have. A minor COG issue is not a big deal, so you don't overinterpret it either. But yeah, I've talked a lot about COG, and I often think the better approach is either try to get it perfectly centered, right? So you can test that in a hover. But if you have a slight bit of extra weight forward, it's not a bad thing. Having a little bit of weight forward is not a bad thing, because once you fly, which most of us are going to fly forward, some people will spend more time flying backwards if you're a talented, pilot that likes to do Matty stuff. But generally speaking, you're flying forward, back motors are working harder, and so they will come up to the same, similar RPM as the front then.
Yeah, I have a question. Hi. I have a problem not related to filters and not related to PID, but related to air mode on my 7-inch. Basically, every time I go in a dive with a low throttle, I have something that doesn't work. I mean, I have to wait 2 or 3 seconds before really the system is able to lower the throttle. Otherwise, I have always the throttle too high, and basically I have no control. I also try to switch off the higher mode and working on the dynamic idle and so on. But in this case, I have something wrong in another way, because basically the pits are not responding when I am not when I have no throttle, and then I have another problem. So I'm working to find a solution in between, and I have also some logs in both.
So you're flying around, you drop the throttle, and the drone doesn't want to come down.
Yeah.
That's not really a filter question, not necessarily. I know there's a common issue here that most people are not familiar with, but let me ask a couple of quick questions. Are you running props out configuration, props out in the front?
Reversed.
Reverse props.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend trying the other way around and see if things get better for you. There is a weird issue that happens with props out on some frames, some builds. And it's not clear why it happens, but I can tell you several builds where it will reliably happen, especially on drones that have like a ducted whoops and stuff like that. Have a real problem with that. And in part what's happening is in these scenarios, there's a continual wind up of I-term on yaw. And when you have I-term that's continually winding up on yaw, you'll tend to get lift. It'll tend to keep elevating.
Yeah, exactly.
It's trying to keep yaw orientation. In order to do that, 2 motors have to spin down, 2 spin up. And as they're spinning up and they continue to push thrust enough that you just
it's exactly this. When I use the yaw, basically it's not possible. It's continue to accelerate.
There are some little things you could try if you really want props out. There are some things you can do to try to mitigate that, but in a lot of cases, none of them work. So if you want to know whether the issue I'm talking about is what you're having, just simply switch to props in. Of course, don't mess this up because you have to change your motor direction. I
know.
Do that, get your props in, try it again, and text me back somewhere direct. Message me. And I'm pretty confident that will solve your problem right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will try.
It sucks because I like props out myself too, right? So whenever possible, I do props out. But on some rigs, I just have no choice. So
I've seen that problem too.
Yeah. What's that?
I've seen that problem too.
Yeah.
I'm glad you, because it was very strange looking in the log and seeing in the quad unable to descend and seeing the wind up. Yeah, that's funny you've seen it. Did you mention why, or do we not quite know yet? Because I spoke to
I have
Chris
some
Thompson about it.
I have some lame theories if you want me to add some lame theories to this.
Yeah, I love the lame theory.
I think that with yaw control, we have predominantly rotational inertia of the motor bell that drives yaw, right? You can yaw your copter on the bench without props, right? It'll go ching, but it won't sustain, right?
Yeah.
I think that yaw involves more than that. Like I think it's pretty obvious that there's something coming off the tips, probably air. So normally we think of thrust as straight down, but I have a hunch that there's some thrust that gets thrown out around the prop line. And when you do a props out configuration, you have all this area where the air is flowing. Again, lame theory. Okay, I'm not an engineer, but this is my hypothesis. You have this airflow coming out. Let me get a drum.
Yeah.
You have airflow coming out, so this is your props out, right?
Yeah.
It's the front of the drone, like that. And so the air gets driven out here, comes around, and then slams against the side of the drone here, okay? The reason I think that's got something to do with it is because I've seen this issue really problematic in drones that have a big central pod. The first one that came to me like that was, remember a few years ago, there was a guy who had this waterproof drone. The video went semi-viral. He flew right into the waterfalls went down underwater and then popped it up. That drone came to me. Somebody came because they had an issue with that exact problem. And that thing had this big molded plastic central pod, right? So that one had the problem. Another one that had the problem was a kind of ducted rig, but it actually had just a big duct on the inner side of the prop line, right in here. And then it was very narrow out here. And that client, we took the ducts off and the problem went away instantly. In all these cases, going props in, solved the problem as well. So, but again,
Yeah, I think airflow
Blame
going
theory.
through the body, does.
I will
definitely affect
try
the
and
yaw.
let you know.
yeah. What was that again, Stephen, though?
Airflow traveling through the body is beneficial to the yaw performance. Like I remember, do you know Bob Ruge?
Yeah.
He found that ages ago. Like I saw him talking about it because it's exactly what you say, that the rigs with a body that didn't allow any airflow through were just not performing well on the yaw axis.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that makes sense.
I wonder too. Then, if there is that airflow, then you have both the front props and the back props doing it in a props out scenario, right? Front ones are doing this into the body.
Yeah.
The back ones are doing that into the body. So I've wondered, like when you're at full throttle, how much air is blowing in on that flight controller, potentially jiggling the wires around and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I because of those kind of strange interactions going on, I always just fly props running normal.
Yeah.
Just because I'm suspicious of props out, because we've got more flight time.
What I really liked about props out was, like, even if you're flying in a little bit of fog, like, it's kind of fun to fly in just a little bit of fog. It's a really cool looking video you can get. But the moment you head out with a little bit of fog and props in, you'll notice the FPV cam slowly gets, like, basically.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm not doing that much foggy flying,
but you're in the UK, so you're certainly
it's rain.
in the midst of lots of fog.
But yeah, maybe if I can avoid some rain on the lens, I could try it. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, boys. Thank you again. It was a really good meeting this time again. I think we have some really good content here. I always appreciate it. I like seeing these meetings growing. Hopefully, more people with cameras. So if you're having issues with camera, just remember you want to download Zoom. I don't think you can actually share screen or do things like that unless you have the downloaded version. It's free. It's a small program. So and I like Zoom because I have a full account. I own an account, and it allows me to do this. It just works a little better than some of the others. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Have a good
Cheers,
Have a good Sunday.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.